Okay, so welcome to the second research session of our conference, held by Dr. Richard Vail and Dr. Michael Gizzi. Dr. Vail is a professor of business at the Colorado MAXDAYS University, and Dr. Gizzi is a professor of criminal justice at the Illinois State University. And for their research about changes in corporate business strategy, they focused on quarterly investor earnings reports from Netflix. And we are super interested in how they have used MAXQDA for their research and what they found out. So Dr. Vail, Dr. Gizzi, please take over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Richard Vail from Colorado Mesa University, where I'm a business professor.
And I am Michael Gizzi. I am a professor of criminal justice, a political scientist, and a certified MAXQDA trainer. Before we start, I think it's useful to provide a little context of why is it this business presentation is being done by a business professor and a criminal justice professor. Rich and I have been friends and colleagues for about 25 years, and we taught together for many years. And I used to drag him into many of my research projects in political science. And so it was time for me to do some business stuff. So we love to do interdisciplinary work. Rich, take over.
Okay. In the US, many publicly traded companies provide information to investors through quarterly shareholder letters and earnings calls. An earnings call gives investors an opportunity to ask questions of senior executives. What can these communications tell us about the past, current, and future strategic plans of a company? We basically chose Netflix because it's an interesting service organization for students and that it has a very rich history of successful innovation, from DVDs by mail to streaming, to original content, to multinational expansion, and last year to gaming. So what can the shareholder letters and earnings calls reflect about these stages of learning and strategic change and choices during this kind of growth? Netflix publishes shareholder letters each quarter. Their earnings call is a bit unusual because it's videotaped and transcripted. 5 senior executives from the company answer questions that are posed by an analyst from a financial services company that represents the shareholders' interests. The name of the analyst, by the way, is published prior to the call so that any interested investor can ask questions or provide questions to the analyst. Okay, in the summer of 2019, Mike and I started with a question. Could we use these documents to better understand the dynamics of the development of business strategy as it developed over time? Another question we had in our minds was, can we use MAXQDA to track thematic changes in strategic activities for Netflix in a new way? A traditional business strategy case study is usually focused on a fairly specific business decision at a particular point in time in the company's history. We were wondering whether thematic analysis provided a more rigorous understanding of the crafting of business strategy as it was done in a company.
And
yeah,
with these questions in mind, we created our first MAXQDA project together. And Netflix has a investor website that provides access to all the PDFs of the earning calls, transcripts, and the shareholder letters. We downloaded those from their website from 2018 through today. And so every quarter we add more data to our project. And for the initial research, we converted the PDFs into Word files that were easy to work with in MaxQDA. In the original project, and we're going to be talking about sort of where we started and where we are right now, we had the letters and transcripts as separate documents in MaxQDA, and we organized them using document groups. So we had one document group for letters, one for transcripts, and there was one for every quarter of the year. To be able to analyze the work that we did coding those documents with the quarter as the unit of analysis, we created document sets as well, one document set for each quarter. So there would be 2 documents in each of those. Before understanding the research we're going to present to you today, I think it's useful to have a bit of the broader context of the original project. In looking at that data, we used the combination of both deductive and inductive coding methods. We initially did paraphrasing of literature to focus on core strategic concepts. We did paraphrasing of some of the quarterly transcripts and letters to gain a better understanding of the themes and topics covered in these letters and transcripts. We wanted to begin to really understand what was in our data. And that work has served us very well over time because it made the current research much easier because we understood what we were dealing with. And after doing that exploratory paraphrasing, we created an initial set of thematic categories that we coded through close readings of each document. We used the smart coding tool and code to examine coded segments and refine the content analysis for a second and third cycle. Advanced usage of code comments and memos were also used. And so what you see here is a screenshot from the project, on the original project. And you can see sort of the depth of the coding system. And there's a lot of subcodes in here. Activities of Netflix is a theme, and then these are the subcodes. We used a lot of comments. There's a lot of work that went on in this over time. And then finally, from that original project, this code matrix browser, organized by the document sets, shows us the scope of the coding of the main themes in some of the codes. So if you'll notice here, we have a code that we never could have imagined in 2019, which was the impact of COVID-19. And you'll notice here that beginning in Q1, it becomes a major part of our discussions. This is from an earlier version, so the coding's not 100% done there, but just to get a sense of it. Back over to Rich.
Okay, as the project evolved, we wanted to be able to use the data to address different research questions. Now, this is a living project. Each quarter, Netflix presents new reports. We wanted to add the data. That usually led to another cycle of recoding, not only the current data, but the past data. And we wanted to address new research questions. One of the questions was, what drives the questions being asked by the analyst? What causes them to ask certain questions? Okay, on January 20th, 2022, Netflix released its latest earnings report, covering 21 Q4, which is the fourth quarter of 2021. And basically, while I was reading that transcript, the phrasing of one of the questions asked by the analyst caught my attention. She said, as usual, I'd like to start with the net adds during the quarter. I should translate that. Net adds is a phrase used by Netflix for analysts to refer to increases in the paid subscribers. It's a measure of growth for Netflix, and it's presented each quarter both as a result and as a forecast. So it's an important part of the discussions. But we wanted to say, I mean, clearly it was important to investors, but having gone through all of these transcripts, wasn't always the first question. So I wanted to know whether it was an as usual or not. Okay, during the 16 quarters covered by the study, that's 4 years, 6 different analysts represented the investors. The question, did they share the same approach? Could we learn something by looking at these initial questions posed by the analysts? They were likely to be the most important things for them. So those questions are the ones that are really the framework for today's, the project we're looking at today.
Okay. And so what did we do? Well, with this new set of questions in mind, we called it first questions. We decided to start fresh with a brand new MaxQDA project. In many ways, we viewed this as a standalone sort of mini project. We didn't want it encumbered by the large-scale coding that had been done before. It gave us a chance to take advantage of some of the improvements in MaxQDA 2022. Its handling of PDF files in particular are much improved. And at several points in the original ongoing project, we felt limited by having the shareholder letters and earnings call transcripts in separate documents. And we thought we could combine the original source data, the 2 PDFs per quarter, into one document, beginning with the letter and then including the transcript. And so we used Adobe and we made those combinations of files. And once imported into MaxQDA, we had 16 documents covering the time period of 2018 through 2021, so a 4-year sample. We initially coded the first question asked by the analyst in each document, and then the first answer or answers to that question given by Netflix executives. And oftentimes, as many as 3 or 4 of the executives would jump into the discussion. And so we would code each of those as first answer. And so the initial coding of first question and answer was in many ways similar to the coding of interview questions. You know, this is just sort of what the question is and what the response is, but it's not about the content of it. And that's where this opens up the ability to use a lot of MaxQDA's tools like smart coding or even analyzing categorical survey data if we wanted, to further refine and code the data. In addition, we extracted financial data from the shareholder letters and created several document variables that we could use in our analysis. We wanted to have the ability to draw on a lot of this data. We weren't certain exactly what we would use, and up to this point, we've only looked at a couple of the pieces. But each shareholder letter includes in-depth financial data, and we copied that data into a spreadsheet and then imported it into document variables. So for example, in Q1 of 2018, since we had been talking about net adds, and that's going to be one of our major themes today, the increase of new paid subscribers in the prior quarter was 7.41 million net adds. So all of these are in net add in millions. So that is one of the steps in the process. Next, we coded the analysts. I actually used in vivo coding to just capture their names, and then I stored those under a parent code, interviewer analyst, and from that I also created a categorical document variable, so we'd have that information easily at hand throughout the process. We could use it in summary tables if we wanted to. And then after that, we turn to how are we going to code these questions? Well, in all honesty, we coded the thematic codes for the initial questions, it was developed in a different way than in the original research project. As I mentioned before, we had a pretty significant base of knowledge with these documents, and instead of doing a paraphrasing approach with the first questions coded, we looked at the coded segments in MaxQDA's summary grid, and then wrote out rudimentary set of summaries of the content that we used to identify the codes we thought we were going to develop. It was non-traditional. May not be the normal best, the prescribed best practice, but it worked, and we were able to successfully develop a set of codes for the topics of each question, and that enabled us to easily, sort of even move forward further in the summary tables we developed later. So you'll notice here, here's what the question was summarized as, and then we added in our initial sort of sense of what the topics were. We've changed the names of these codes, but it captures it for you. And so as you can see here, in the first question in quarter one, the original question was, thank you, Reed. I want to ask you, given the strong results again this quarter, can we talk a little bit about what the company's doing today that might be different from what it did 1 or 2 years ago that can hit a scale of the business, particularly as you're moving into new markets that might be quite different from the developed markets you've scaled. And then we just, summarize that as what is the company doing to hit scale, particularly in developing new markets. And we ended up coding those of activities of Netflix and global issues. And then with that, out of a close read of that summary table, we created 6 thematic codes, which we then applied to the first questions with the smart coding tool. So you'll see those right here. And then, we use the smart coding tool here to code these first questions. Back to you, Rich.
Okay, once these questions were coded, we used 2 different tools to examine the results. We started with code frequencies to see the breakdown of the coded segments, and we used the code matrix browser to look at those results over time. We also created a QTT worksheet to store the results of the analysis. The questions were sometimes covered with multiple versions of the answer. Because sometimes the answer to the question for the person needed several explanations, we coded all of the explanations that were used. They covered multiple topics, and the code frequencies are greater than 16 in the sample, which is okay. Basically, we put this into a QTT, and our insight here was, yep, these are net adds. Subscriber growth is clearly an important topic. It shows up several times in the data, but not every time. Okay. Here's the explanations that we had that were shared by various responders. And this is where I was talking before about using different ones. This is also a situation where the responder might come up with 2 or 3 of these concepts for explaining what happened with net adds. Our broader study did provide significant basis for deducing some of these topics, and we used the smart coding to code the responses fairly rapidly and consistently. Okay. With that in mind, we then turn to the answer. Or let's see. Excuse me. At this point, we knew the first questions were not always about net adds. we looked at those. So we decided to maybe wanted to look at the second questions. We knew that sometimes the questions were icebreakers of sorts for the new analyst, or just a start of a meeting kind of question. So we decided to look at the second question and the second responses. Okay. Okay, we basically ran into a methodological problem here because we kind of got mixed up sometimes. Should we use the same codes for a question? Should the topic codes be the same, or should it just got pretty muddled up a bit? So we decided to try a solution here for us that was basically asking whether or not the questions should be distinguished, and could we use the visuals then to really show the differences between questions. We could often figure out what was going on, but could we use the visualization tools to actually see clearly what was happening? So we duplicated the codes of the basic structure of and we found that the same codes would also cover the second question. Okay, now we can see the second question topics and the first question topics separated out. And we also can see the analysts. And you'll notice there's an interesting pattern to the analysts. They tend to stay around for a while, but they basically don't last more than about a year before moving on to a new analyst. Okay, so it gives us a little bit of a picture into what's going on.
Over time.
Over time, yeah, and it very clearly over time. That's Q18 Q1 through 21 Q4, which is basically was January this year. Okay, so what does this tell us? Basically, net add subscriber growth appears in 10 of the first questions. So yes, it's important. It also appeared in 10 of the second questions, but only in 12 of the 16 documents overall, or the quarters overall. So short-term subscriber growth is clearly important to the analysts, clearly important to the investor. It is, perhaps we can say safely here, the usual first question, but only there are 4 times it wasn't used. Okay, so the question is, what happens with these 4 times? And so we picked out those particular quarters where the first question wasn't about net adds or the second question. In 3 of the 4 quarters where net adds were not initially discussed, the results were above the forecasted expectations. So basically, the investor is much more concerned if the expectations aren't met, if the forecasting is a little bit low or a lot low. But in general here, 4 of the times, but that still leaves us with 1 quarter that's not really explained by that particular understanding of what might be driving the choices of the analyst. Okay.
Is this the same? Wait a second.
That's okay. And basically it's saying,
yeah.
Can we look at these quarters and see some difference in the explanations or some difference of what's going on?
Perfect. So how do we do that?
How do we do that? Right. We found it. Okay, we created a summary table using the explanations of net adds in each quarter. And And basically the summary table, let's see, we needed to add something to the summary table, which turned out giving us a category that was, why wasn't it discussed? We sort of built that through the summary table, and we looked at sort of why might it not have been discussed. The first one, pretty straightforwardly, because the forecast was pretty accurate. So the analyst went on to something else. The second time is a little one of these icebreaker kind of things, but it's a particular situation where they had a new executive in the discussion and the call, a new chief financial officer for the company who had only been there for 9 days. So instead of focusing on net adds, the analyst asked a question, what are your first impressions? And followed that up with a question about, a more general question about how things were moving forward. It was a gentle beginning to the discussion as well. But it's worth noting that even here, although the net adds were relatively low, they were, I mean, were below expectations. They were not very far below expectations. So it wasn't super high on his list. Might have gotten to it in the third question. And then it's worth noting in the second quarter of 2020, we also had a change that went on in personnel. Two of the executives who were in the call had actually gotten expansions to their role in the company. This might have had something to do with what happened in the first quarter of 2020. In 2020 Q1, that was when COVID hit. And you'll notice it hit Netflix in a very positive way in terms of net adds. It also hit in a very negative way in terms of producing new shows. Okay.
So the entire process focus here was not about net adds at all.
Yeah, they were not interested in net adds to begin with.
Right.
And in fact, the shareholder letter, well, we haven't talked much about here, but the shareholder letter in that case was the first 2 pages were covering COVID-related actions.
Perfect. So that answered some of our questions, but we still wanted to go a little bit more deeply. And along those same lines of the impact of the pandemic, our next analysis, and the last one we'll demonstrate here, was a closer look at the explanation of net subscriber adds. And since this occurred 10 times in each question and in all but 4 quarters of the sample, we thought this was worth a closer look. And so we had all these 9 subcodes that were developed to explain it. And in looking at that data, there was one theme that especially jumped out at us, the code for what we call pull forward. And you'll notice this right here. It doesn't begin until quarter 3, right after those 2 quarters of incredible growth. After that huge increase in new subscribers that Netflix gained in the first half of the year. We wanted to better understand the dynamics of that. And so we began the process by reading each of the question answers carefully, and we began to develop a QTT, a questions, theories, themes theories worksheet on the concept of pull forward. Now, what exactly is this? The chief financial officer, in his answer to the question in quarter 3 of 2020, provides a definition. To look at quarter 3, the biggest impact was really the first half of the year and that giant pull forward in subscriber additions in the first half of the year with COVID. When we have that much pull forward, we expected and knew there would be some level of slowdown, and we tried to project it as best we could. You can see this clearly with this huge hump in the 2020 weekly global paid net ads year to date for 2020. This was in one of the letters actually from January 2022, and I coded it as a visualization of data that I could bring into as an important segment. And it shows you the weekly growth in all 4 years of our project. And the first COVID sort of shutdowns led to an extraordinary growth in subscribers. And these subscribers are ones who would have probably joined Netflix or were forecasted to join Netflix in the next years, but were there already. And we use this, and so this sort of helps us better understand what's going on here. They've got more growth here, and that implicates new members growth here and even here. And so we went further with this, creating a summary table we use the summary grid to create a summary table to summarize all of the discussion of pull forward. We added in what the forecast was, the explanation of net ads, and the pull forward. And while that summary table is quite educational, we actually felt that we would benefit from a more powerful visual, a max map. We used the code model summary map. And those summaries here are presented in a single code max map for the code pull forward. We have the definition through the memo, and we have the summarization of each of the quarters here, and added in the graphic as well. And so in looking at this, it became very clear we wanted to be able to present and understand why it was such a major part of the discussion in the earnings calls for the last 6 quarters. It became an especially important concept to help investors understand why there weren't constant gains in net paid subscribers in 2021 compared with prior years. There was so much growth of new customers in early 2020 that would not likely have become there was so much growth of new customers in 2020 that would not likely have become customers at that point, but were expected to become customers in future years. And as a result, the company has to grow through that pull forward. And the point was that while the quarterly growth might be down, it was on a much larger customer base than 2 years prior. And the issue of pull forward remains a problem into 2022 and has been reflected in every single earning call. And with that, I'll let Rich wrap this up.
Okay, returning to our basic questions, did all the calls begin in the same way? No, but net ads was a pretty important common question. Did the 6 analysts differ in their approach? Yes, but they also all seem to be guided to a certain extent by the quarterly results of what happened at Netflix compared to their forecasts. Let's see. And one of the analysts, particularly, and she's the last analyst, 7 of her 8 first questions in 4 quarters were about net ads. So, and she's also the one that prompted the initial study. That's not too terribly surprising. We can learn something by comparing the initial questions to the transcript. Yes, we did. We did find out that 12 out of 16 times they were about net ads. When they were not, the forecasted expectations were exceeded, or there was a personnel change of some sort, or there was some sort of major event like COVID. And basically, we want to think about what we found and also in terms of future research. This is just a small part of a much broader project. We hope it's provided you with a way of visualizing many of the ways MaxQDA not only made the research possible, but also enhanced it. Okay, so we're ready to take your questions.
Yes, thank you.
And I don't see any questions on there, so if anybody has any questions, please ask. Let's see, do we have anything in chat?
Not since the beginning.
Okay. So we're willing also to take comments on what you liked or didn't like about the presentation and the research project, and the use of MaxQDA.
Silence. It's like teaching a Zoom class. Thank you, Janine.
Oh, we have another one here. There's one question in the questions.
Can you explain the difference between qualitative content analysis and the thematic analysis you used? I mean, the thematic analysis is a qualitative content analysis, I think. We were simply, our focus was we wanted to be able to describe these answers and, throughout both of these projects, in the context of broad thematic areas, which we then wanted to be able to refine. I think that's basically all I would say. We have a lot more to do with this project, without a doubt. And the original project is probably going to undergo a pretty significant revision from some of the things we've learned in the last 5 or 6 weeks working with this project.
Oh, it undoubtedly will. And as I mentioned before, it takes a revision in a sense every time you add a new source of data. But we do want to keep it up to date. I'm currently using this as a teaching case in classes, and in my graduate class, they're using MaxQDA, and one of the hopes is that they will use MaxQDA to contribute to the research overall of the Netflix situations.
We have some questions here.
Oh,
the research is not published yet. How does Netflix feel about your project? We don't know that they're aware of our project, but the data is all publicly available. So
yeah.
No institutional review board data is required. This is all public documents. If you want to extract only the portion that talks about future and past of Netflix and earnings calls, how would you be able to extract only that portion once the same portion is coded twice? Exported coded segments will include them twice. For one, we're not planning on using that same method to go through the entire letter, because this was very focused on first and second questions, but I don't think that would really be a problem. We'd be able to use retrieve segments for documents that that captured that concept. If the concept was, because each segment is only going to be coded once, because it's an answer to the first question or the second.
But the thing is, we can also change the coding.
Yeah,
it's possible to change segments. Coding of segments is changeable. It's adaptable to new situations. It can get extraordinarily messy, which was one of the reasons this was restarted. We wanted to make it a reasonably clear, straightforward research project on its own.
In the same sentence, yes. If they talk about two concepts in the same segment, those segments will be coded twice, but you just have to be able to grapple with it from the sense of what part of it, how it relates to the concept you're looking at. I think summary tables really help. I'll get to those in 1 second. Hannah, hello, Betsy. Thank you for both this. How did this project start as exploratory, and if we had any hypotheses going on? Wow. My recollection was it was sort of like, can we use this to study business strategy was the real question.
That was the question, and
Yeah.
you know, very really, the question is around from business strategy, looking at these things. Does the business strategy academic literature actually line up with what is happening at Netflix? And so in the larger picture is can we by looking at Netflix more very directly as a case, can we see evidence that the theory that we have in business strategy is reasonably accurate and provides a framework for managers to use and for academics to use to understand business strategy, both for themselves and for their industry.
And we're particularly interested in it, the ability to look at changes over time. What data did you access from websites and social media? This was not a study about Netflix's like Twitter or social media stuff. We solely dealt with their investor website, publicly published data. And if you were to Google Netflix investor, you would find their website under financial data.
For this particular project, for the larger project, we have gathered other sources of information and gathered, continue on a regular basis to gather what's happening at Netflix. For example, what was Netflix's response when the Russian government asked them to actually publish Russian propaganda?
Yeah.
To put it on their streaming system. Give you an easy answer. They're no longer operating in Russia.
Yeah.
They also shut down 4 productions of programs in Russia. They shut those down as well.
But that's more for the broader project and for a lot of the stuff like teaching and the case studies and stuff like that.
Yep.
The other question we sort of answered, sort of what's the goal of the research and how did we come to the project? I was introducing Rich to MaxQDA.
and Rich had to say, what do I want to do with it?
And it just sort of spun from there. But I think we've answered that. How long have we been working on this research now? What we presented today, in all honesty, that's been done in about 4 weeks.
And and it very literally started on with the fourth quarter,
January 21st, 22nd.
22nd. It was like, wow, here's a question.
And then we said, well, let's present this. See, 4 weeks. The broader project has been ongoing, and we've been working together every week for 2 hours a week for over a year. We had a break for a while.
We've had some breaks, but not a lot. And it is a fun project. It's a very valuable tool. MaxQDA is wonderful. I desperately wish I had had anything close to that when I did my doctoral dissertation.
Yeah, you and me both. I think we're just about out of time. It's 2 approaches.
New question.
What would you recommend a similar method for analyzing large sample semi-structured interviews? There is nothing to share yet. This is still quite exploratory in terms of it. We're not quite as focused on fine differences between qualitative and thematic, but we did have broad topics or themes or categories that we used.
And it's also worth remembering this is qualitative data.
Yeah.
You have to look at it and read it in order to understand it. And putting it into categories can allow you to put it into numbers to a certain extent, but it becomes highly dependent on how it was interpreted and coded.
And with that, I think we're about out of time. And this has been wonderful. And thank you, Rich.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Everyone for coming to learn about a different way of using MAXDAY.
I think you have a thank you slide.
Need something on here.
Okay.
I might.
Thank you guys for the presentation.
Thank you.
It was really, really interesting and a lot of questions. Thank you also for the audience for working. So
yes, thank you.
Yeah. So Mike, we see each other in the next session, teamwork in a new
I know.
team cloud. So the last hour of the conference day one is now actually begun. So enjoy the last hour and see you all tomorrow. Thank you for the research session.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Rich.
See ya.